So, today we're going to break down a really powerful argument that accuses the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, of being partly to blame for Pakistan's economic crisis. We're digging into a piece that asks a pretty tough question. What happens when the world's economic doctor might actually be part of the disease?
And this right here, this question is really the whole foundation of the argument we're looking at. See, it frames the IMF as a doctor, not just some bank, and it asks whether the medicine they prescribed is actually making the patient, in this case Pakistan, even sicker.
Okay, so to really get what the author is saying, you've got to look at the long and pretty troubled history between what the source calls the chronic patient, Pakistan, and its recurring doctor, the IMF. Yeah, 25. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how many times Pakistan has gone to the IMF for a bailout. And the point the author makes is that this isn't just a string of bad luck. It's become a cycle of dependency, where the country's own leadership keeps bringing it back to the very same doctor for pretty much the same treatment. Now, this is where it gets really serious. The whole accusation really hinges on this idea of a duty of care. It's this basic idea that you have a responsibility not to hurt other people with your actions if you can see it coming. The author is accusing the IMF of violating this principle. It's basically the financial world's version of a doctor's oath to first do no harm.
So, how does the author actually build this case? Well, it starts by diving into the evidence, and it begins with what the article calls a tale of two budgets, making the case for what it calls a sham austerity.
This quote from the source just cuts right to the chase. The core accusation is that the IMF's program wasn't real austerity at all. The claim is that it basically gave the government a green light to keep spending like crazy while everyday folks were forced to carry the entire weight of the economic pain. In this chart, it just lays it all out. The source points out this was the biggest fiscal adjustment in Pakistan's entire history. But look where the cash came from. A whopping 73% was raised through new taxes on salaries, on businesses, and on essentials like fuel, hitting ordinary people the hardest.
Right, so while the public is paying more, where's all that money going? Straight back into government spending, which absolutely ballooned. Personnel costs jumped by 59%, development spending up 64%, and other non-interest spending shot up by 70%. And this is all happening during what was supposed to be a period of austerity. It's wild.
And to really hammer this point home, the source compares this to the IMF's program in Greece. Now there, real austerity meant deep, painful cuts. 20% of public sector jobs were just gone. Wages and pensions were slashed. But in Pakistan, the argument is the exact opposite happened. It was a totally different kind of austerity. Okay, but this stuff isn't just numbers on a page, right? The analysis argues that these policies had a real, direct, human cost for the people of Pakistan. 114 million. Wow. That's the World Bank's estimate cited in the article for the number of Pakistanis who will be living below the poverty line by June 2025. We're talking about almost 45%, almost half the country. And it's not just poverty. The source also points to massive unemployment. We're talking 18.8 million people out of a job. And what's really devastating is that 6.7 million of them are young people, with their whole futures put at risk because there's just no opportunity. And get this, even if you did have a job, things got way, way harder. Your real wage, what your money can actually buy, it absolutely plummeted by 27% in just a couple of years. All of a sudden, your paycheck was worth more than a quarter less than it used to be.
So all of this, it leads to what is probably the most serious charge in the whole piece, that this absolutely devastating economic result wasn't just an accident or some policy mistake. It was, the author argues, a deliberate political choice.
The author just puts the question out there. Was the way the IMF set up this program, protecting government spending while putting the squeeze on the public, was that just a technocratic oversight? A simple mistake by some economists in an office somewhere? Or was something else going on?
And here's the answer the author proposes. The argument is that the IMF isn't just operating in some political bubble. No, it can be a tool of foreign policy. And in this case, the claim here is that the program was actually designed to prop up a specific government that was favored by foreign powers.
And to back this up, the article lists what it calls the Pakistan treatment. This apparently included a pretty soft program design, lenient conditions, and just looking the other way when reform targets were missed again and again. And all the while, they're out there publicly saying things like strong program implementation.
The analysis also points out that the anti-corruption rules were way weaker than the super strict plans forced on countries like Sri Lanka and Ukraine.
So where does this all land? What's the final verdict here? Well, the analysis pulls all these different threads together to make its final case against the IMF.
Look, the analysis is really clear on this point. This is not about letting Pakistan's leaders off the hook for the country's long-running issues. It's all about shared responsibility. The argument is that the IMF, through both the things it did and the things it didn't do, is also culpable.
And this brings us right back to where we started, to that fundamental principle. The final verdict here is that by giving its stamp of approval to policies that pushed millions into poverty while protecting government spending, the IMF failed its duty to, first, do no harm. And in doing that, the argument goes, it didn't just fail to help, it actually made the country's deep-seated problems even worse.
And that leaves us with this really powerful final thought. You know, it's easy to focus on the chronic patient. But if the author is right and the doctor actually shares the blame for the patient's sickness, then the real question becomes, who holds the doctor accountable? It's a huge question to think about, especially since this long, complicated relationship, well, it's still going on.